Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Feeling Thursday KOF Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. After some consideration of how we are going to be doing these moving forward, we've decided to keep the lounge setting at best of 3 in terms of consecutive matches. In other words, you get one rematch. And today we are trying to get used to characters as their core concept more so than doing a bunch of analysis on matchups, since we have a different set of people in the lounge today. There are obviously going to still be some matchup analysis notes made, but expect less of it, with more this character does this and here is why you'd want to do it this way, etc. We do have the benefit that we have a larger set of players than usual today. That might not be so good for the original plan of the number of rematches available, but it does allow us to have the sort of standard interaction with this type of player, for example. Because you can just win this by timeout, obviously. This is particularly true for characters like Ryo, who can whiff punish the jump itself with all sorts of good options, while still jumping himself without necessarily getting beat up. You can obviously get hit for jumping, but you don't really care about it if your opponent is in this mental state to begin with. In fact, it's usually in your better option to just not attack at all once you've gotten this far down, because they are going to lose by timeout. It's not really something you have to care about. And while that isn't as beneficial, you can't really do anything about it if your opponent has chosen to retreat a lot. If anything, building up more meter for whatever else your character can do or want to do is important. But our main issue here, I guess, is that you can't be sure that we're going to have a particularly good stream if that's the style. It might just be that they put some random character in the beginning to get more meter for their Rugal, though. It's looking like that. They're taking this a bit more seriously, both in terms of spacing and attacks they can do. So we might see something more explosive happen after the K-Dash in this case has been defeated. One thing you can be relatively sure of, though, is that at this health level from Ryo's side, a player who did all of this to build up meter isn't likely to use it. And that might shut down somewhat the way they will counterattack you. That means it's even more possible to get to full meter yourself and have a relatively big advantage in the next match. Of course, your opponent will now be looking for a big confirm and some explosive damage, but you're now at least at 4 meter each. So technically, I'd say DeWolf is currently ahead. I would have given more information about how to join this lounge, but given the flow and the number of people involved in it already, I'm not really expecting that you'll actually be able to get any matches. Those who are likely to have their experiences from this lounge are already in it. In general, though, if you would like to join up with us, these are Atlantic Rim lobbies. If you've got good internet and are anywhere on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, well, Northern Atlantic Ocean, you'll probably have a good enough connection for stuff to work out. This sort of fits the theme of stream because, as noted, if the player is not necessarily comfortable with their own character as much and is often in the retreat space, there's not as much analysis to do. It's technically, at that point, all characters are very similar. Some of them obviously have longer range moves, different game plans, more safe moves, little things that make them special, but unless you're willing to use them, usually in an offensive way, it's more or less going to be the same across the board. This does, however, give our Ramon time to get used to some spacings, some other moves, and technically, therefore, it is still fitting the theme of this stream. It looks like they're actually done here, but I'm not sure what that does. I guess the winner, hopefully it actually keeps track of this and leaves the winner in position. It appears to have done something to that effect, so we might get to move on. So in its own way, this ended up being first to one, at least to start with. And people will rotate into the center slots to take matches. We'll see if the same thing happens now. Dwarf didn't end up actually playing King because they didn't get that far. This is one of those times where I have to make at least one remark on matchup for the very beginning, and then probably we'll just leave it quiet, depending on whether or not this opponent is really good and explosive, or also a beginner working through their own stuff. Vanessa versus Ryo is a lot of zoning from Ryo's side. Like, a lot of zoning. She can get through it relatively easily in specific spaces, but that's not really the sort of thing that Ryo cares about. Because of that stand kick you just saw, he can just hit stand light kick and control a lot of space when he's not in an optimal position, let's say. Because all he really wants is to get Vanessa slightly further away from him, so that he can go back to either zoning or reacting. Crouch Heavy Punch also has massive pushback, as you've just seen, and will create the same sort of situation if he's forced to be too close. But just stand light kicking will get him out of a lot of situations. The main reason it works well enough is that even though she does hop, the way that her hurt boxes align themselves when she's trying to do damage from the hop means she still gets hit by his fireball. This match, however, there's not much to say. It's Iori versus Ryo. There's a lot of close range stuff and reaction, but I wouldn't necessarily say there's a matchup knowledge issue to be had here. Oh, Iori has slightly better range. I guess that's it. Okay, so we've gone from no rematch to reshuffling of order to probable rematch to people not locking in characters just yet. Okay, well, moving on. I wonder if we'll see the same team. I realized that I unintentionally trivialized the previous situation by just leaving it at Iori has better range, but that changes a lot of the way the matchup flows. That said, it's the sort of thing I would have assumed that DeWolf would have just adapted to, but now it might be. Yep. Now it becomes a sticking point of this matchup because now neither of them has meter and has to play out this match primarily based on their ranges and footsies. Ryo's lesser range means that he often wants to stand right outside of Iori's and use that crouch heavy punch whenever possible to get so much pushback that it doesn't matter as much. You'd think that it'd be the other way around, that Ryo would want to stick closer using his low pushback moves such as his crouch light kick, but because Iori's good attacks involve walking forward or attacking in a way that Ryo can relatively easily counter, being slightly further out is even better. The problem is that when Iori is allowed to approach freely, he can attack almost always before Ryo can. As meter becomes available, Iori gains more options such as faster and stronger punishes using various EX moves, and can slip through a lot more of attack positions using those. In this matchup, they're relatively back to even in terms of ranges, though Ramon does have to commit a bit more than Iori does, due to not having specials to cover the outer space as easily. Tactically speaking, if I were the Iori player, in this case I would probably have been trying to actually use meter to push Ramon down further, because Mai isn't as good in this matchup as far as I understand it. She spends longer in the animations of her moves, and that allows larger whiff punishes from Ramon, and she's not terribly great at catching him when he goes off the wall, therefore having to whiff punish herself. This is compounded by the fact that if you have to wait for him to do the off-the-wall moves in order to be ready for the whiff punish, he gets a lot of flexibility in neutral. And you really don't want to deal with Ramon's flexibility in neutral. EX to get pressure, basically. So you can see she ends up playing a very safe sort of slow game, which probably isn't optimal here. Whereas Iori would probably have had better punishes for positions by using up some of the meter. Meter that Mai really didn't end up getting the chance to use.
Nothing will stop this show. Round one. Ready? Go!
This can be a hard matchup on Ryo's focus, as Yashiro does in fact move so fast that you have to punch him out of things, usually with just a light punch, but even that timing is difficult. And, similar to the things shown earlier, he doesn't really care whether or not he actually gets there, he just wants to reach you so he can force you to start blocking. Ramon, on the other hand, has much more flexibility because he can hit Yashiro out of things more easily while using his own offensive attack skills and plans, and can move around a lot more. One thing he will have problem with, as just demonstrated, is jumping. But it doesn't tend to matter as much because of the number of whiff punishes that he has available to him. If things get really bad, you can use your Shatter Strike to get through almost anything. And Ramon's Shatter Strike is good enough that if you do it at the correct range, nothing much will happen to you. That sort of thing, preventing yourself from getting locked down, is even more helpful. Now, most of the things I've mentioned are not things our Ramon needs because our Yashiro is slightly more defensive as a player in the first place. But there's good things to know as a generality. And even if you get worn down in this scenario, not only is Benimaru harder in terms of the Benimaru side, in terms of dealing with Ramon's overall game plan and low heavy kick, for example, the meter doesn't help so much. Fortunately, Ramon is low enough on health that it doesn't have to help a lot, it only has to help once. And didn't end up needing to be done at all.
Round one. Ready? Go! 強い上に男前。勝負始まりだぜ。Burn to fight. Ready? Go! Player 2 wins! Hasta la vista! 始めようか Stand your ground. Ready? Go!
Now with decent meter on both ends and Benimaru and Ramona having high health in both cases, you can expect a match that is slightly more explosive. Even here where, okay, now there's like a half round life lead, it's not necessarily going to matter. Yeah, see, that's why. Benimaru is fortunately still in the position of having, or was in the position of having, slightly more meter, and overall this turned out to be extremely, extremely even. But one thing to pay attention to is the fact that when Benimaru does go for a move intended to keep him from getting hit or just cover a good space in front of him, he takes very long to recover from that move. Fortunately, the move itself is often very protective, but if you've got some more tricky character movement, you can often catch him or get through it, and a lot of the time it's easier to roll through knowing that he won't necessarily respond or react in time after you've managed this roll. So many characters where their zoning tool, you could say, is just to throw out a regular attack, you don't want to roll against them, and normally projectiles, your opponent will figure out a way past them. But here, you can definitely consider that if you're able to challenge in neutral to make your opponent feel like they need to put out the Ryoken, then you also should roll, at least some of the time. Tactically speaking, this should be a blow up for Antonov given the meter amount, but that means that King would generally have the perspective of, okay, how do I not get hit by your super? That's all that's really needed in this matchup, because she is generally capable of handling this character due to her speed. But at the end of the day, you still have to not get hit by the super somehow. And having to worry about it also changes your options in a lot of ways. Especially when one can just EX into the combo of it, yes.
観客をも盛り上げるナイスファイトだ。
And looks like we're back around now, since that was 2-0, I think. Technically we're still on flow here, because we are probably streaming for another 25 minutes and the lounge staying open for a little bit longer than that even.
Nothing will stop this show.
But now we're going to see a test of mobility and stickiness. Understanding how to stay on your opponent very close up with Chris is important for characters like Yashiro, who can just punch you at long range, and Benimaru, who once you're not in range, you have trouble hitting again.
Round 1. Ready? Go!
There's one good step to it, but a large part of this comes in understanding when your opponent is likely to keep defending, and when therefore you can use Chris's flip over. This will often prevent you from being able to get corner, but this character doesn't really rely on cornering anyone, and often is more risky because if you get back thrown, a lot of moves become more predictable. So being in the attack and then basically guessing slash feeling out whether or not you should try to get over their head using the punch DP move means that you will not have to worry about as much stuff like that. But as this move is fairly easy to dodge and really punishable, on top of not even doing much damage, it's there to get you to continue to have control, because you can at least maintain it after that. Angel's situation is a little bit easier because she tends to go under things Yashiro does fairly easily, and therefore she doesn't need to start this match from getting close at all. Her goal is not to get closer per se, but to mislead the opponent. And as Yashiro, you probably don't have a lot of options other than making sure that you hit her whenever she seems to move. Probably you shouldn't flinch too early, basically. This, however, is a good situation because if you have got her into the corner, you can control enough of the range that she can't back away and then trick you. Unfortunately, Yashiro can't really force that situation as much as some other characters can. Your blowback attack is a good option, but it depends on where y'all are on the screen to begin with. Which pulls the whole thing down to more footsies.
Yo! Round one. Ready? Go! Yo! Stand your ground. Ready? Go! Player 2 wins!
所詮あにゃたはカモなのにゃ。
行くぜ Now or never. Ready? Go! Lightning kick! No! Lightning kick! Lightning kick! Lightning kick! Lightning kick! No! Lightning kick! まず耐えられるかなうりゃ KO! Player 1 wins! Stand your ground. Ready? Go! Lightning kick! No! Lightning kick! まずは3番蹴り No! ほら Lightning kick! Lightning kick! 甘いぜごめん Lightning kick! Lightning kick! Lightning kick! スラーせいやまずは3番蹴り 手荒にしてごめんよレニーお詫びと言ってはなんだけどこの後食事でもどう
And we are full, beginning a bunch of rotations around once again. I expect the lounge will stay open long enough that most of these people will get to play their matches. But they might not all hang around because of the fact that it's so long. At the end of the day, that's the sort of thing you really have to devote yourself to. If you've decided to join a large lounge in a game with relatively slower flow, probably have to do it, like, not expecting to play for another 20 minutes. However, if you're in the mood for just watching matches and warming up mentally that way, then it tends to work out.
Titans! Round 1.
I'm really liking this stage. Part of the reason this takes as long as it does, despite that number you see at the top of the screen, is in fact that that number doesn't actually count seconds. That number counts 2-second blocks, for some reason. Presumably because matches in KOF are in fact slow enough due to all of the movement and dodging that a lot of them would go to timeout either way. As you already see them go to timeout when technically we are at 2-minute rounds. With this many people in lounge and with some people already having got quite a bit of the practice and thought that they wanted to do, you might not see rematches, at least not between these two, going forward, which means that you will probably get to see a couple more people on stream before we close up for the night. Again, not necessarily closing the lounge, just the stream part. As I will probably no longer be talking, moving to do something else, and if you want to watch the matches, then there's still space in the lounge that you can jump in and just watch the matches from there. Their system of not necessarily putting you straight into the queue means you can do so just as spectator mode without worrying about it. Without even having to set yourself as spectator. Technically that's not as good because you might not realize you have to do that or remember it because of other games, but it does give a very arcade feel to it, even without all of the arcade machines we get to see in other games now. So far, everyone's generally flowing their characters the way they normally play in other games, so nothing's too surprising there. And it looks like we'll probably be doing actual full analysis next week simply because one must adapt past that in order to make sure that you understand what you're trying to do. Splashes. This is another system that's somewhat useful, but we can't really enforce. If you felt like you knew what you were doing and only barely lost, it offers the option for a rematch to try it out, and probably the others watching might not be as concerned given that probably the first match was kind of hype. But if you are unsure and the situation didn't go as you planned, for one reason or another, it's much easier to just not rematch rather than being unable to wish that it went better. Well, now we have two higher ranked players, so I might have a little more to say, as it will give you a slightly better idea of what people actually try to play this game like in particular ways. And obviously I am now paying attention because this is where I get bot data. Terry in particular would be helpful, and Robert, we have kind of a Robert bot, but I would appreciate having a second, more specialized one. So I'll look into that. Unfortunately, it's hard to gather information in ranked because a lot of the time once people start to lose, they just retreat from full. Generally, we'll probably be fine given that while our bot does not have that particular pressure string, there's not much you can do about it anyway. That's one of those things where you have to stop Robert from getting there to begin with. Terry's a little better suited at this than Clark is, and can of course form his own attack strings a little bit more cleanly, as the way Robert's punishes work does offer some easier positions for Terry to push from. It's somewhat difficult to whiff punish Robert's lows, but if the opponent is mostly mashing them, you're not going to really have the same sorts of problems. most moves in the game will not lose to him tapping lows, even if you extend your hitbox at quote-unquote the wrong time, or rather what would be at the wrong time in terms of most other games you'd expect. And as you can see here, Rugal is a lot more likely to get away from this position as he has a much better uppercut style thing and can just disregard Robert's projectiles. So, while this is a rough comeback to make and I'm not necessarily expecting it, especially with things like this going on, it's not the sort of thing you should consider impossible or necessarily even that difficult. Well, assuming this player is continuing or that they rematch, I should be able to get some more information, but right now I don't have anything to change in the Robert bot as a result of it. Defending against this on Chris is actually slightly easier, but it involves not using most of Chris's main game plans. Robert isn't going to give much in terms of ability to rush in, even if you use the heavy kick version of the dash, but you can use both of your cross-up style things. In fact, your entire goal in this matchup should be to get behind Robert by any means necessary. Be it rolling, be it using that move you've just seen there, or by using the DP with punch. And the rest of it is understanding that once you've done that, once you've started to get into that mindset exactly, your opponent's main plan should be get into the air so I don't have to deal with all this, and your plan should be to uppercut that. This is particularly helpful because of the range on Chris's uppercut, even though you don't get much damage out of it. But you can't use this as a neutral tool, you still have to keep on basically going for everything else. You want your opponent to get into the air more so than anything. And once you're cornered, I think it changes slightly, the EX might be enough to get you out. But even then, you could still just use a teleporting style move. Angel, basically the same deal. She doesn't have to uppercut to stop Robert from the air side, she can just hit heavy kick sometimes. And she has some sort of cancels and other things. But once again, entire goal, get behind and then attack. Don't try to attack on the way in, don't try to shift the opponent's mindset too much. In order for their stuff to work, they have to be watching for you to do this. And there's a reasonably good outcome. Basically getting them to the point of, okay, I can't afford to be close enough to you that you can do this. Athena can also do this, but her teleport takes so much longer it might not be a great plan. She can, however, just play the projectile game and get over the projectiles, so a worn down Robert is a reasonable situation to have to deal with. It is a little harder to manage to do things properly relative to her uppercut against this character, so be a little careful with it, but once you're cornered, the fact that hers goes straight up is technically good for you. So technically, I once again still don't have any changes to make here, as the player mostly did what the Robert bot does, save for the fact that they have that one pressure string. And I'll maybe see if I can add it just so that you learn to punish it, but it's more so along the line of standard punish, and he does have the Tatsu itself, so that you can learn to punish that regardless. So given the speed of that, it looks like they are taking the rematch, presumably to see if it can be done any better. And that might bring us to the end of stream, even if it does involve Robert OCVing again. When dealing with the projectiles themselves, Chris normally can just use other options without thinking too much. But unfortunately, our Chris player doesn't really think in terms of evasion. She thinks in terms of, how do I get through this thing? So the timings on her evasion are probably going to be off on this character at least. Angel will probably be a little better, even considering that she has less tools for the purpose, simply because she has less tools for the purpose, meaning that Rune Siren will probably not be thinking in terms of using them and therefore getting hit by the projectiles. It's a lot more likely that she just won't do anything to that effect and, right, neutral jump it, think about positioning, and so on. But unfortunately, Angel lacks the invincible mid-range things to allow it to work. So once you are cornered, you do have to watch out a lot more. One of the main things you want to learn to deal with here is probably not best taught by the Robert bot. When placed in those positions where you're expecting the pressure string, quickly hop attacking is usually your better option. I think for Athena she can just use forward light kick and not have to actually execute the hop, but I'm not sure. Bearing in mind again that all you're watching for here is where you think your opponent is going to try to hit you with that. If that's not likely to happen, or if you can just block your way out of it, then just do that. But that situation where you are at max range, the hop will usually work, and understanding which of your air buttons will knock Robert out of his own hop, since he will obviously start after you, is really important. But that does in fact bring us to the end of this stream. You can expect our next stream to be on Saturday. "60 times, dead or alive." Our Absolver stream should be on Sunday, but we can't be absolutely sure of that because there's other stuff going on. And we will not be having any bot release content tomorrow, this Friday. On Monday we'll be back to Street Fighter V, our mishmashing battle lounges, and the cycle will start again. You can find all of our bots at 2-mk.org, but again, if you're here for King of Fighters, then we probably don't have anything to offer you just yet. I'm still working. And the result of this long outro is that you're going to see this stream end at the end of this interaction rather than the full match. You can find everything about when we are streaming and when we are releasing bots at 2_MK_FGC on Twitter. But this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.